Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Dr. Joe. How are you doing?
So I guess I'm in three places at one time.
It's morning,
Okay.
afternoon, and evening someplace.
You're right. You're right. I am doing pretty good though. Again, just happy to be here on our podcast, our weekly endeavor. So I'm
Most
happy to be
excellent.
here.
Most excellent. Well, we'd like to welcome our viewers and listeners to another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening in and attending. And today's topic is going to be about the tools in your toolbox. And yeah, tools in your toolbox. That's it, literally and figuratively. There's a method behind that statement, believe me. So, Dr. Joe, what are your thoughts on having tools in your toolbox?
So Dr. Dave, that's funny because being a former aircraft mechanic, I
There we
have a
go. A
lot of
lot of
tools
tools.
in my toolbox for that particular purpose to work on airplanes. Then I also have tools for around the house, to
Mhm.
do odd repairs around the house and working on the car, things like that. So there's a couple of forms of toolboxes that I have, but I
Mhm.
don't think you were talking about those type of toolboxes.
Well, maybe we are, maybe we're not. You did
Okay.
you did mention the professional side of things and the
Absolutely.
your
Yes.
aircraft tools and
A-
tearing
as
apart
part of
cars
my profession. Yes. And
and
again,
building things and repairing things. Then you talked about the
absolutely.
personal side of the tools for things that are maybe a little bit more closer to home. So,
So with that, yeah. So again, we talk about the actual professional tools that maybe mechanics use or other industries. But what about that toolbox you use for professional or personal career? What type of tools do you have to help with that profession or with those things? So think about this. You don't have those, actual sockets, ratchets, hammers, things like that. But what about other tools that you've accumulated over the years to help with, again, your personal or professional
mhm.
development? What type of training have you attended? What type of courses have you taken? What kind of workshops or what type of on the job training have you gone through that has helped you with your job or with
Mm.
your building your skills in a particular arena, whatever your profession is? So it's funny, we always think about, like it's like Dave said, literal tools, like I just kind of identified some hand tools. But what about, again, all those tools that you've accumulated and put in your toolbox that you frequently go back and use? So, for example, years ago in a new position, I learned how to do intranets or portal pages for our, internal for our company. At that time, I just thought, hey, I would learn how to do that so I could be a resource. Well, years later, I'm in that same boat again where I had to tap into some of those skills that I had or those tools I had in my toolbox, and to perform that more recently. So, just think about tools that you might have in your toolbox that you've had to recall in the form of some learning or training you've had. I also like to remember this one or think about this one, and some of you may be able to remember this or may be familiar with it. But back, years ago when I went through leadership training, one of the approaches was that everyone fit into a category. You were, this type of leader.
Mm.
You're laissez-faire, you're aristocratic, you're all these different styles, and that's all you were, right? That was the only thing that you had
You
to
only had
find one.
one tool. You only had one tool to
Exactly.
use.
Yeah, exactly. So you were basically one approach fits all, basically. And so now, over the years, as research has changed and just people have changed, and so now I look at it as all those tools in my toolbox are applicable. If
Yeah,
I want to lead people, I
makes you a
have to.
diverse leader.
Absolutely. I have to be able to look at the situation and then be able to adapt to that situation and use the style that fits that situation. So those are some of the tools that I've accumulated in my box. Again, being a senior leader in the military, just education, all these tools, all these things that I've learned are now in my virtual toolbox in some ways, or just in my memory toolbox, but
Mhm.
they're all form of my toolbox that I can use today, that I can continue to go back and pull those specific tools out that I need. So that's kind of my thoughts on our tools in our toolbox, and how we apply those things to get us
Well,
started anyway.
well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And I'm going to do a very poor impression, but we all have very specialized sets of skills. And I have a little anecdote for that. Several years ago, when we were doing some light DIY work around our previous house, I was laying tile and we had tile left over, so we basically tiled everything: walls, floors, ceilings,
Right,
over the lights. The furniture was all tiled.
right,
No, just kidding. The furniture wasn't tiled, but my wife had asked. We had a breakfast bar, which is more like I called it a crap collector because all we did is put keys and mail on there, and we never ate off of it. It just kind of got in the way. And I'm like, yeah, we could take down the breakfast bar and make a nice island for you to work on, work with, and have a little bit more space in the kitchen, make it a little bit more open. And she's like, great, okay, that's awesome. And we're like, let's rock and roll, right? So I take off the countertop, well, the wall, it's a breakfast bar, it's a little bit higher than everything
right,
else, so it needed to be leveled out. So I get my Sawzall. That's for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like a short straight blade that kind of very versatile. And I tried that and the battery ran out. So I'm like, well, what else can I use? So I'm like, oh, the circular saw. So it's got a little bit stronger blade and a little bit deeper penetration into the wood. And I did that, and it got a little bit better, but it still wasn't dropping that breakfast bar down. There's still too much
right.
wood in place. And then I went out into the garage, and that was probably the third mistake I made, because I went out there 3 times, obviously, and I grabbed the chainsaw. Yes, folks, Dave grabbed the chainsaw and dropped the breakfast bar in the kitchen, and it came down beautifully. Nice line, nice and clean, just straight. And we built a beautiful countertop. However, that chainsaw made a mess of
Yep, that's exactly what I was
everything.
thinking.
That sheetrock dust from the wall that I took down it literally took us 6 months to clean all the dishes and the china and the silverware and all the Tupperware and plasticware and whatever else we had in all of our cupboards in the kitchen. Plus everywhere else, the dust was sucked into the vents and put around the rest of the house. That was always fun. So yes, the chainsaw did get the job done. However, there was probably a better tool out there that I could have used.
Right,
So I'm not saying don't use the tools in your toolbox. I'm just saying be aware that some of them can be a little bit more messy than others.
right. Well, you just reminded me of a gentleman I worked with years ago, a lot of years ago, and to protect his name, or the
Sure,
name of the
sure.
innocent or not so innocent, I'm not going to use his actual name, but this is what we called him. And again, I'm just going to substitute my name. It wasn't me, but I'm just again going to use my name. But we used to call him Hammer Joe.
Uh,
Right. And so again, this was in my mechanic days. This was actually when I worked for an organization where we did lot, maintenance on equipment,
mhm.
manufacturing equipment. And so he got the name because if you went to his toolbox, he had every size hammer you could think of, from I'm talking little tiny hammers to I'm talking big sledgehammers. So
Wow.
what do you think his first tool
Tool was.
that he grabbed anytime he had to do work? It was a hammer. And in a lot
Uh,
of cases, we wore earplugs in there, but in a lot of cases, you'd hear some banging and you turn around, and who was it? Hammer Joe, because that was what he liked to use for everything. So you talk about, having tools in your toolbox, but is it the right tool? That I
yeah.
think that's the most important thing.
Or if you don't have the right tool, is there another tool that you can substitute that will do
Right.
the same or equal or possibly better
Right.
without making a huge mess.
Absolutely.
And
So,
yes,
and that's
folks, my hand is raised.
so that's why, I kind of refer back to again that statement I made about the leadership styles back in the day. There was only
Yeah,
so many styles of leadership that we recognized, and if you weren't one of those, then I don't know what style you were using. But
yeah,
again, that's just kind of reminds me when we think in terms of the actual tools in our personal toolboxes that are going to help us grow, develop, and help others. So,
sure, sure. And you know, part of us talking about tools in our toolbox, we've had similar discussions in the past on our podcast. I'm looking off to my right, and I'm looking at the list of podcast items and podcasts that we've created, and that is essentially a toolbox.
absolutely. Yeah.
And it can be used for personal development or professional development,
Yep.
career development. It can be used to help your family and your kids being a role model. It can
Yep.
be used to help you, maintain or improve your position at work. But these are all parts of the tools in our toolbox, aside from the physical tools like the hammers and saws and
Right. Yep.
screwdrivers. When we start thinking about the cognitive tools, and this can get into the interpersonal and technical tools. Um, so these are some of the things that we've talked about. I'm just going to rattle off a few. Um, Dreams, team
Right.
building, taking the long scenic route. In other words, don't learn from others if you can. We talked about mentoring. One of
Yep.
our favorite items offline, especially, is humor. Joe and I
Yep.
tend to think that we're comedians offline. I don't know why, but we do.
Not everybody agrees with that
Not
though.
everyone
So,
agrees. No, absolutely not.
what do they know?
Yeah. We've talked about taking action and staying the course, being not so ordinary. That's just a handful um, of tools that we've talked about. And that's important. Just like the examples that Joe provided with leadership. Leadership has changed. A lot of things are not static like they used to be. Technology
Right.
has improved. There are many more people in the world than there was, 100 years ago. There's a lot more information out there, and it's really almost it's like an ocean of an unlimitedness, if you will.
Right. Right.
And so part of understanding the tools in your toolbox is, I guess you could, another analogy would be reading the instructions for those tools and understanding the nuances of the tools that we have and how they can be used and how they shouldn't be used, the warning labels for those tools, the, hey, by the way, you can use the blender for also not just making margaritas and adult
Right. Right.
beverages. You can make them for you can use it for other things. So, yeah, well, the tools in our toolbox are rather extensive, and we tend to forget about them. We get our
Right.
favorites and we drive them, or we
Right.
use them,
Yep.
and we improve them and take care of them and polish them, and sometimes we forget and neglect those other tools in the toolbox. They're maybe in the bottom, those other hammers and screwdrivers and saws, and we should really, if they're in our toolbox, we should pay attention to them. Not necessarily, and you're not necessarily going to use them forever, but at least be aware of what's in there. You might be surprised that of something that you didn't think you could do because you didn't have the right tools. You actually do have those tools. You just need to blow on them, dust them off, clean them up a little bit, polish them, and
And
you're good to go.
and Dave, you talk about knowing what tools are in your toolbox, that comes with that, which we always talk about in probably every episode, is that reflection, that
Absolutely.
self-reflection. That's really the only way you're going to be able to take stock of what's in your toolbox. Because like you
Mhm.
said, and I know this for myself, that I have learned so many different things. And so my toolbox is probably, I can't put the latch down or the
Right.
cover down anymore, just because there's so much stuff in my toolbox. And that's what I was kind of referring to at the beginning when I said, hey, years ago, I worked on building portal pages or intranets
Mhm.
for an organization. And then, today I'm still using those skills because that's
Yeah.
something I learned.
Yeah.
So I think that is a challenge, trying to recall some of those things that are in your toolbox that are there. And sometimes it just comes to us. We'll start working on a project or start working with other people, and then we'll start talking about those things in our toolbox that, like you say, that are dusty and we haven't used them in a lot of years, but we can still reference them because they were in our toolbox. And I think that's what's important. It's just, again, you probably have a ton of stuff, and I always say this, I probably have forgotten more
Oh,
things
sure, sure.
than that's in my toolbox, or it hasn't been used for a lot of years. But you just never know when you're going to be able to apply those particular tools. But so just taking stock sometime of those tools, or just continually to improve those tools, because you said it, things are not static anymore. They're moving so rapidly. So some of the things that you learned even last year are
Yeah.
may not even be relevant
Look at
anymore. So
software
it's that.
applications. They're always coming
Absolutely.
out with new
Yeah.
iterations.
Yeah.
And, and to that point, just because you have a tool that's older doesn't mean, and it's designed to do a certain thing. Let's say it's some sort of tool to build a bridge. Well, maybe you're not building bridges anymore, but maybe you need to build a shed. You can still use
Right.
that tool for other
Right.
things, maybe
Right.
not to the maximum capacity it was designed for, but you can still use it. My law enforcement career, I haven't been in law enforcement for many, many, many
Right.
years, but the safety and security and, observation pieces, I still carry them with me. Am I
Right.
observant like a canine ninja? No, I'm not as stealthy as a tiger or feline pet that's walking around our house, but I still have some skills. If I polished them, I could probably not creak as much when I moved,
Right.
maybe put some oil or grease in those joints to make them not so rickety. But yeah, they can still be used. Again, blow them off, dust them off, polish them up.
So, and you bring up a good point that could help us with people thinking about skills they bring to the table or their backgrounds, and I think that's why it's so important to embrace you
Mm,
know other people's backgrounds and the skills they bring
absolutely.
to the table, because just to your point, you're in law enforcement, but that could translate to other jobs, other
Sure.
positions, and I think that's what when people, hiring managers or recruiters, when they're looking at your background, sometimes they just disregard those things, when in reality those things could be very effective in whatever role they're looking at or considering you
Sure.
for. And so when people, that's why when we talk to people about their backgrounds and interviewing skills and things like that, preparation, we really highlight the fact that a lot of their skills are transferable,
Transferable. Yeah.
and a lot of people don't view it that way. So sometimes we have to coach them into understanding how it could relate
And
to
go ahead.
something that they're gonna that they're applying for, that they didn't think they had the skill set to do, or not along that same line.
And I'm glad you brought that back into the discussion. Another anecdote that I can share is, talking about transferable skills and the tools in your toolbox, and
Right.
maybe they don't match up exactly, but you can use them in other industries.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We can think about, and I'll use myself as an example. One of the companies I worked for, we had a small team of about a dozen individuals, and it was in the tech sector. And three of the individuals on the team, myself included, had doctorate degrees. We had PhDs.
Oh, wow.
None of our backgrounds were in technology,
Okay.
but we were there and we did a good job. We did a great job because what we learned throughout our career were the transferable skills within there, the analytics, the writing abilities, the
Right.
ability to understand the bigger picture, and to demonstrate how diverse this team was. Aside from the folks that did have technical backgrounds, IT backgrounds, my background is business, and so is my education. One of the individuals had a background. They did have IT experience, but their part of their background and their education was in atmospheric algorithms.
Oh, wow.
That's
Okay.
science. That's way more. That's above my
Right.
head. That's like
Right.
you're talking like rocket science now.
Right.
And then the other person, their their background, they had a tech background and but again, their education and the things that they've done, and this person had done some ridiculously awesome stuff too, anthropology and archaeology.
Wow.
So again, being able to, pun intended, dig into things and understand and evaluate and assess what you
Right.
have and press forward in that environment, that new environment, just goes to show you do not necessarily have to be an expert in a field. You just have to have the transferable skills and the
Right.
tools and the ability to adapt to that environment. And adapting to an environment is a skill set. So
Absolutely.
you know, don't when I talk with folks who are looking at their careers and their professional development and even personal development, I tell them, do not diminish the skills that you have. You
Absolutely.
might be
Yep.
surprised how diversely they can be applied.
Yep.
I've talked to an individual who flew airplanes and aircraft on a couple of different airframes for many years, and that person decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. They're
Wow.
like,
Okay.
I'd been there, done that, don't want to play with aircraft anymore. And I'm like, what do you want to do? And they're like, I want to do something outdoors. Well, how do those skills transfer? And we talk about, you know, different leadership skills or backgrounds that can help
Right.
them in their new direction. You know, so don't don't put yourself into a box either. You know, we talk
Right.
about
Right.
boxing
Right.
ourselves in. You know, we are human beings. We're not just one thing. We are many things. And when you box yourself in, or someone else boxes you in, and you allow
Right.
them to do that, you're self-imposing or allowing or acknowledging these limitations that may not exist.
Right. Again, you're diminishing your value by
Right.
doing that. And that's a very good way of looking at that. That a lot of times we allow other people to dictate,
Mhm.
you know, again, because they don't see that entire toolbox that you have. They're only looking at specific tools,
Mhm.
and that's the downside. So that's why I say, you know, when we talk to people, we help them understand the value of their large toolbox or their
Mhm.
diverse background. The challenge is getting others to understand that. So I think that's
Right.
why it's important for you to understand the power of your own
Mhm.
abilities and all the things you
Absolutely.
bring to the table. And that's one of the things me and Dave try to do with people is just help them recognize those things that they bring to the table. Again, the more they recognize it, the easier it is for them to explain those transferable
Mhm.
skills to other people. So that's why we really harp on them understanding, you know, and
Sure.
helping that translation process so that they can help articulate that to those people
Yeah.
that don't see all their, you know, valuable tools in their toolbox.
Yeah. And we have
Um,
to be creative when we think about these things, you know.
right.
Yeah, and I'm going to use kind of a generic example, the field of healthcare. Well, I can work in a hospital, you know, but there's more to it than that. You can work at a
Right.
defense contractor, you can work at a college or
Yep.
university, you can work in corporate America, you can work in the government. I mean, healthcare is a transferable industry. You do
Right.
not have to
Right.
stay just at a hospital. You can work in many other places. Most places like tech is just about everywhere out there, you know.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, don't limit yourself thinking, well, I'm in IT and information technology. I have to work for a big tech company. You don't. There are other
Right. Right.
companies and other industries that would love to have you on board, just like the medical backgrounds and the business backgrounds and the education backgrounds and you know, atmospheric algorithms and archaeology. I mean, you'd be
Right.
surprised where the skill sets that you have that you can share and utilize and repurpose and
Absolutely.
develop. You know, the multi-tool. You know, when I was growing up, oh, you had a pocket knife or you had, I think it was the old folding spoon, knife and fork thing. And now
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
you know, then there's the Swiss Army knife, you know,
Yeah.
and now it's
Yeah.
like now you have these multi-tools that'll, you know, I can build a microwave with a toothpick and rubber band, you know, it's
Right.
you'd be surprised.
The MacGyver kit.
The
Yeah.
MacGyver kit, yeah.
Well, that's funny because, you know, just kind of along that line, my bicycle, you know, I've got a little toolkit for that. And it's kind of
Mhm,
one of those multi-tool things instead of, you know, having wrenches and a box full of Allen wrenches and things
mhm,
like that. And so it's now kind of a multi-tool for the most common problems you
Right.
might, be involved in out there on a ride. So yeah, and so I want to think about, or if you're out there and you're listening or you're viewing this, one of the things that I just really encourage people to do is like we've always talked about. I mentioned it earlier. It's just that self reflection. Just evaluate what's in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Take the time sometime just to maybe write down all the training that you've attended, workshops, classes you've taken, just those types of things.
Your
What type of
experience.
jobs? Yeah,
Yeah, the type of
that's what I was going to
jobs,
say. The jobs you've
the
had,
big pieces and the small pieces.
yep, all those little projects you did, just all those things. And again, you'll be amazed at a lot of the tools that you have in your toolbox.
Yeah.
And at the same time, which tools do you need to upgrade,
Yeah.
or
Or go get and then
or
acquire.
go get? But yeah, once you've done that evaluation, again, if you know where you want to go, do you have the tools to get you there? So, taking that evaluation or taking a look, checking that, we used to do that with our toolboxes. Check all your tools in there to see if
Yep.
they were even used
Yep.
anymore.
The shadow boards and make sure everything's
Absolutely. Yeah.
present and in good repair.
Absolutely. Yep. And so again, you recognize, hey, I'm using this tool more. Maybe you need a couple of those, or
Mhm.
maybe you need to get a tool that does a little more. So it's
Yeah.
just again that evaluation.
Or maybe
Uh
you need to replace that tool because it's not in use anymore. And you just
absolutely.
need to go out and, suck it up and just say, hey, I need to get more. I need to get
Right.
something new to replace this thing because this doesn't work anymore or it's not
Right.
applicable.
Right. So it just, yeah, that would be my one recommendation, is to really take stock of where your tools, what tools you have in your box. And again, if you need to go get more tools, like Dave said, do you need to bite the bullet and maybe take some more training courses, or, get more schooled on certain
Yeah.
aspects of
Or
your,
find a mentor or become a mentor or coach
right,
or be coached. Um,
right.
and celebrate these tools. A celebration is another topic we had. I'm looking
Right.
over here. There's a list. I'm like, you know, writing the stuff down. Having passion and being motivated. And again, the self-reflection one we cannot emphasize enough.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's really, we don't know the tools that you have. No one knows all the tools that you have. Only you do, and you'd
Right.
be very very surprised at what you have. I talked to some of the folks and to some folks, and they're like, yeah, I don't have any experience in technology. And I
Right.
asked them, what do they do? And I'm like, they say, well, I do XYZ. Well, do you input data into like using software applications? Well, yeah, I do. Do you put it into like a spreadsheet or a database? Well, yeah. Do you maintain that database? Yes. You have database experience.
Right.
You're inputting and
Absolutely.
maintaining a database. You just didn't realize it because you do it all the time.
Right. Yep.
So
Yep.
again, pause, self-reflect, really think about what you do, not just, hey, how do you get to work? I get in my car and I go to work. Dave, what's your point? There's more to it than that. You got to
Right.
close the front
Yep.
door. You have to lock it. You have to unlock your vehicle. You have to open the door. You have to sit down, put your seat. There's a lot of things that we just do and take for
Right.
granted on autopilot. So there are many tools in our toolbox. And I would assert that most of us are probably good at helping other people, in one way or another. We all have knowledge in areas that we're very, very good in. And so, be willing to share that knowledge, whether it's volunteer or paid or whatever. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities to practice and hone your skills
Right.
without having to actually do it as a paid occupation.
Right.
Plenty of opportunities to help other people.
Absolutely.
So we've
Yeah.
got a couple minutes left. Any final thoughts there, Dr. Joe, about tools in your toolbox or for your toolbox or a new
Um,
toolbox altogether?
well, like I mentioned before, and Dave mentioned it too, these episodes that we put out there are tools that you can put in your toolbox. He mentioned or rattled off a few of them, but there are quite a few topics that we discussed that can be used in your toolbox,
Mhm.
professional, personal, for friends, family. If they
Professional
don't
side
apply
of
to
things.
you,
Yeah.
you can forward them to someone else. But just about anything that you learn or that you take in, that you read, that you see, could be used in your toolbox. It's the other side of that is just knowing how to apply and when to apply those tools to whatever situation you're in. and Dave mentioned it before, understanding those tools, maybe you need to read up on those tools that are in your toolbox. Maybe you need to understand them fully
Maybe you
before
just
you
need to
again apply
refresh
them,
on those
or you
tools.
might need to refresh them. So
Yeah.
again, like I said, I've said it multiple times already, just that self-reflection piece and understanding what tools you have in your toolbox and really evaluating what that looks like. Because like he said, like I've said, we have way more tools than we even know how to use in some cases. So sometimes we need someone to help us define what that looks like, or
Mhm.
some assistance, or we may need to assist someone else.
Yeah.
So our toolboxes, for the most part, are really large. It's
Yeah.
just maybe going in and, like Dave said, with a shadow board. And I go back to, again, writing down all the classes, just
An
taking stock of
inventory.
those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that inventory of your toolbox. I think that's a very good way to say it. Inventorying your toolbox.
And
So
you mentioned something, and I know we're kind of going back and forth real quick. But maybe it's time to hand those tools to someone else, hand them over,
right.
pass them
Yep.
on.
Yep.
Maybe you'll keep a few of those tools, a few of those hammers, because those are always great, right? Keep a few
Right.
hammers in your toolbox, but maybe you don't need 75. So maybe you share some of that knowledge, give some of that
Right.
knowledge away, give
Yep.
some of those tools to other people. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, I think I'm satisfied with this episode. I think we've uh,
Yep.
shared quite a bit, and maybe a little bit too much sometimes. And with that, we'd like to thank our listeners and viewers for listening in and viewing another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, give us a like, subscribe, join, share, spread the knowledge.
Absolutely.
That's what it's
Yep.
about. So until next time, keep on being your not so ordinary you.